Hello and welcome to the next session, which is going to talk about digital transformation in the building societies in the UK. We're going to talk about how it's essential to break silos when you want to be agile, quick, when you want to actually get things done. And we're going to talk to representatives from Yorkshire Building Society and nationwide. So my name is Rudy Falat. I'm a host of Voice of Fintech podcast. I worked in finance for the more than 20 years, or more than I'd like to admit. Also in HSBC, Deutsche, and in London, and in Credit Suisse in Zurich. So, as I said, welcome to Rebecca Fitzgerald, Senior Manager at Yorkshire Building Society. She's in charge of technology delivery. And Chris McAvoy, Senior Solution Architect at Nationwide. So welcome, Becky. And Chris, how are you today?
Good, thanks.
Fine, thanks.
Brilliant. So let's also set the scene and introduce yourself. How did you get to what you do? But even more importantly, what's your mandate respectively at Yorkshire and at Nationwide? So maybe, Becky, if you'd like to tell us a few words about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm somewhat a building society lifer. I've got over 20 years experience in the sector. I'm a Yorkshire lass through and through, if you can tell from my broad accent. So my role as Senior Manager of Technology Delivery, it really spans the responsibility for around 220 internal colleagues alongside our sort of supplied resource, which is about 50-50 split these days. And I cover software, DevOps, reliability engineering, robotics, testing, change and release. So it's quite a dual leadership role. I cover both operational and transformation, or as some may call it these days, you build it, you run it. So my average day or night will span from crisis management at the front line to other times where I'll be strategizing with architects and business leaders to understand the technology needs for the Yorkshire. I've got quite a keen eye on delivery models and creating the right environments. Really interested in that constant flow of delivery and service. It's all really fueled by my own passion for leading people and creating purposeful teams. I'd say that my curiosity is always on, sometimes slightly annoying. And I'm interested in how human beings, as we operate and improve, and just obsessed with different cultures, mindsets and personalities. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and my passions.
Brilliant. So over to you, Chris.
Thanks. So I've been in the mutual sector for, well, all my life, because I started working part-time in the co-op retail side, which is a mutual organisation. For the past 30 years, I've worked at Nationwide. I've been a programmer all my life. So I started with the ZX81, which ages me a little bit. I've worked in the nuclear industry, writing software, and also in the mining industry for Rio Tinto. But the last 30 years I've been at Nationwide, programming, engineering, architecture. And currently what I do is, for the last 18 months, I own technology governance in Nationwide. So how can we make the governance processes fit for purpose for different ways of working? That's the real challenge we've had over the past 18 months. And that's me.
Great. Well, welcome. Thank you for that background. Of course, people talk about pandemic and financial services in one sentence all the time, right? Some say that pandemic has accelerated digital transformation or digital adoption trends, or it has changed it. Of course, it impacted your clients. It impacted the way you work as well. And even though, you are coming from the technology angle anyway, and Chris mentioned, you were also in some industries that are potentially, first physical, then online. So what I would like to find out more from you is trying to be a little bit more specific to and give people a bit of an example and a feel how digital transformation works and looks like in the building societies these days. Of course, there is more to it than just the buzzwords. You can throw in actually another buzzword, which is DevOps, and then there are challenges like the silos, right? And you need to then embrace the stakeholders and perhaps change the workplace culture as well. So why is it needed? Why the technology sometimes is actually not the most challenging part, but it's the project and getting it done, right? So why do we need to change sometimes or break the silos, Becky?
Yeah, so I'd probably say, digital is the trend. We're all moving towards that from a transformation agenda. But at its highest level, I think the organisation of people within a building society, we really need to align and engage with the business strategy. Key drivers around, we talk a lot about cost income ratios and cost efficiencies within the building society and getting the best value. But similarly, on the other side of that, there's the driving the innovation and being quite competitive in our environment. So I think that's all underpinned by creating the agility that's needed in the organisation. So I think for building societies, YBS especially, we've seen lots of mergers and acquisitions over the past decades, they've been the obvious reorganisations, removing duplication systems and processes. But in recent years, I'd say that this focus has changed. I think two areas for YBS would be the acceptance that change is a constant, and it needs to be driven by that cohesive value stream thinking. Typically in the past, there's been quite siloed, functional pet project agendas. And then on the other side of that, there's the adoption of modern day technologies, which are much more efficient and they provide more economical ways of working. So I think both of those factors require reskilling, constant learning. Rigid role profiles and team structures can really suppress the ability to create that flexibility for the future and growth. I'd just finally say that, reorganisation doesn't need to mean redundancies just because it's got a strapline of digital and that feels very modern to the traditional building societies ways. I think if we change the mindsets and ensure that we've got the right career paths, we can map out the direction of travel in the industry. I think that's leading us into, the ability to move quite fast in the digital environment.
Right. So, of course, implementing agile mindset, or sometimes even you can use lean startup methodology thinking in the larger organization, right, is a way to go. Good to hear that reorganization or restructuring doesn't always mean a bad thing. You can reorganize within the organization for a better outcome. What about also using DevOps and other ways or methodologies? Is there anything that you could say that has changed also in the last 18 months, Chris, in terms of using I would call it maybe for some people, hardcore technologies, not just the soft stuff?
Sure. I mean, it's going back to the question of why reorganization is needed. Our member needs are changing. We have members now who may never interact in a retail environment in a branch. They may always interact with us electronically, apart from maybe some major life events. Maybe they want to come and speak to some humans face to face when maybe they're looking for a mortgage or looking to buy a house. But the increased reliance on electronic communication and faster interaction is really important. So our member needs are changing. Technology is moving much faster. And technology becomes redundant more quickly, and also there are also new opportunities. So that's another reason why we need to reorganize around that. And thirdly, really, there's more competition. So we get fintechs moving into financial services world. I think JP Morgan are launching a current account shortly. The supermarkets went into banking, we saw a few years ago. So all of those things mean we've got to improve the agility of our organizations. And what I would say is actually reorganization will become a constant, but we want to move away from big disruptive reorganization to continuous reorganization to improve efficiencies.
Right. So basically, rather than maybe spend 6 months on analysis, how the new org structure will look like, etc., you don't have time for this, right? You need to react more quickly. Correct, Chris?
Yeah, that's right. And, that's where new ways of working come in, because they've got to be things that we can adopt that allow us to move at pace in a safe way as well, because we need to balance speed with safety. And that's a big concern in financial services and in, building societies. We can't just wake up one morning and say, okay, we're going to just invent this new product and launch it this afternoon. There are a few things we need to do first, to get regulatory support, for example, to ensure that we're not creating problems for the future with regard to things like conduct risk. So it's really exciting. because I think there are opportunities there to move so much more quickly to serve our members. But I think the key challenge is a cultural change. It needs to be done in a safe manner, and we need to make sure that we're not causing any future threats for ourselves as organisations, ourselves as a sector, and more importantly, our members.
Right. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's a regulated industry, right? Financial services, depending on the activity, you need, of course, a different license, etc. But it's not something that you can maybe, where you can borrow the mantra from other startups and say, let's break it and then ask for forgiveness later with the regulator. That's not how it works, right? Talking about safety, of course, don't really want to spend all that much time on the pandemic, frankly. But I'm quite curious, how did you find the remote working, for example, when you do things around design thinking and when typically the teams would be brainstorming together and things like this? Of course, the people were using all kinds of tools like Mural and others. I don't know if you have you seen that the people got more comfortable with it? Of course, now there is a big topic of many countries coming back to the office, etc. But do you think also these tools have gotten better, or people got more comfortable, or not, or there are inherent limits to this dispersed, kind of a dispersed workplace working on a problem that requires really a team effort and real-time input? Maybe Becky.
Yeah, I think it was quite interesting because I think throughout the pandemic, because of the, we're in quite a long period now. So I think initially with the real sort of reactive moving the teams, we decided, in my particular area from a technology perspective, we moved out of the buildings to work remotely so that we could make sure that our call centres and our frontline colleagues who really need the office space could work. So I think in the first instance, payment holidays was a big thing for us in our industry. We had to make sure that we could quickly react to what the government were wanting, to offer, all the furlough situations. So I think what was really interesting in that period was watching the team remotely build multidisciplined teams and basically let down the red tape that maybe we sometimes find ourselves up against in the office. We do things in a kind of quite a process driven way. And I think what was really great was to see that everybody hooked into the need. Everybody understood everybody else's circumstances, and actually we were faster, and we were, the quality of what we delivered was the same as if we'd done a 12-month piece of work. So I think in the initial stages that would be, a real positive for how we accelerated. As time moves on and you start looking more at your transformation, so we're really now looking at that outlook for the next 5 years. You start to deal with real design thinking activities, and I do think that collaboration with people in the right room and body language and really just that social interaction. I think I'm starting to feel from the teams that there's definitely a drain with remote working full time. So I think this hybrid way of working that I think we're all starting to find is the sweet spot. I think the tooling is absolutely there if you choose the right tools. Our security teams are always really wary about. We have to protect our systems and make sure that we don't lead ourselves down a path of collaboration tools that have not necessarily been vetted or proven, because it was a little bit reactive. But I think as we stand today, I think we've really kind of come through that challenge, and the technology is definitely starting to help us work in a more remote, collaborative way.
Right, yeah, and following up on the challenges, of digital transformation in your sector. Yes, I wanted to ask you, Chris, and take a slightly, complementary view on this. How did you find working across different generations within your company, or also looking at the different client segments that you have or member segments?
So the pandemic has been, a real driver for change. So now most of us in admin roles, can work from home if we choose to. But if we haven't got an environment where we can work from home, we've got office locations where we can go and work. Now, people in our retail branches, they also interact with customers over the telephone, where before those roles were completely separate. And in terms of working effectively, and I think this is really interesting, what I found is moving out of the office and working remotely has broken down barriers between different silos. So if I give you an example, in the olden days, as they were, really getting a group of people together to work on a design and whiteboard and work on some ideas, the primary blocker to that was actually getting a meeting room with the right facilities, because he had to book it months in advance. Could you get a big one with the right kit? Could you get people from all over the country to come together? So it slowed down that pace of innovation. Whereas as soon as we went online, what we found was people could just organise around pieces of work. They could cut across the silos, and we use Teams an awful lot, so I live on Teams these days, and Teams itself has improved massively over the last 18 months. So we've got online whiteboarding. There are still people who love to get together physically, but that is more difficult now. And actually it's more difficult when you look at the alternative of let's organise online with the right tooling that's secure. So, we might get people who say, I'd love to use tool X, Y, and Z. And then, we look at it from a security perspective and say, no, we can't use that one at the moment because the data might be hosted in a country that we're not comfortable with, for example. So we can't allow people to use all the tools that they would like to use, but we do provide the tooling that has really allowed people to work across boundaries, organise themselves, which really helps us with command and control tendencies, because when people and teams can organise themselves, that's where you can operate at pace with innovation, but you do need the trust. So we need to be able to trust people to do things in the right way.
And of course, changing the culture or the impact on the culture is sometimes very slow and difficult to observe, right? So it takes a while. But I like what you said, Chris, that you removed the barriers to be together because there were physical or logistical barriers before. But have you seen there is a long-lasting impact on your culture already, for example, by being more exposed to other departments or other teams through this? Are people now reacting differently, or there is also still a requirement to perhaps change the incentives, right? People may see each other, they may understand better what the others are doing and the culture, and that gives them insight. But if obviously the alignment of the incentives is not there, then you still have a problem with the silos, etc. So I don't know what you think, Becky and Chris. Maybe Becky first.
Yeah, I think I'm a strong believer in, people should bring themselves to work, and I often find that in the office, people sometimes are not true to themselves, and actually going into this pandemic and seeing people in their home environment, seeing children, pets, what they wear when they're comfortable. I think it's definitely brought a more personal approach to, being able to speak to people, like you say, creating that culture of different departments, different functions. I think it has brought that, community spirit into our ways of working, and not necessarily, I think there's lots of teams who work in silos that are very busy. Everybody's got a lot to do these days. And I think having that ability to see the flexibility that others need, and people are just really, like Chris said, the trust factor. I think some leaders would run in a very command and control way, which actually, if you create the culture of trust and actually teams can see that they're delivering value, I think you definitely get that more engagement. And I do think well-being has definitely been a factor in that. I think sometimes we try to drive culture as an agenda when actually it's a feeling. And I think just seeing, some people have really struggled, with the pandemic. And I think having that support network has really shown how you can build that great culture of team ethics. And I think people are now bringing that back into work, and they are themselves at work. And it's just a really lovely environment.
And Chris, have you noticed any lasting impact on the culture, or it's too early to say?
No, there have been massive changes. So one of the things that's very important to all our organisations today, and always has been really, is inclusion and diversity. So what we found is we've had the biggest changes around inclusion and diversity during the pandemic, and that's because of certain things that we've done or been forced to do. And one of those is home working. So today, I think 70% of our roles are you can work from anywhere in the UK. And that's opened up a pool of talent that we would never have access to before. Our head office is in Swindon. We've got location in London, location in Northampton, and a few other ones around the country. But by opening up to the whole UK for talent, it means, we can recruit people who live on, a council estate in Scotland, who would not have had that opportunity before. So work anywhere for most of our people has really changed, the inclusion factor. We can really bring in really diverse people, and I mean diversity of thought, especially people who think differently from different backgrounds. And that's been the biggest change, I think, culturally, and that's driving other changes in the organisation. We're getting people with very different views, very different experience, and it means we have much richer conversations about what we can and can't do, how we should do things, what we should do, and how we should do it. So I think that's the biggest impact on culture for us.
Brilliant. I still would like to explore some of the challenges that you perhaps had. It hasn't been an easy year or 18 months, right? So especially, Becky, when you said at the beginning you had to implement some short-term changes, in the way you work and things like this. So and then things have changed, and now they're changing again. And Chris said we need to be prepared for continuous changes. So this will not go away in one way or another, whether that's market changes or catastrophes like this one. But how did you manage the changes in the capacity? When Chris says, now we have access to a broader pool of talent, but at the beginning, perhaps the personnel or the HR department wasn't ready for this. So how did you change also in terms of recruitment? And is there any change in terms of contracting or the setup so that you can be flexible as the things change, right? When you coming back to your earlier point, Becky, about being agile, that sometimes means that you cannot hire people full time for unlimited time period because you don't know how much capacity you will need. So how do you now adjust to these changes when you talk about capacity on the personnel side? But then, of course, we cannot talk about this without mentioning the word cloud, right? We would love to talk about cloud. So maybe you can mention that as well. So Becky first.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because the pandemic starts to sort of take over from where we were. I think kind of taking it back to some of the challenges of changing the ways of working and the talent that you need. I think the key is really about choosing the right blends of methods that you need to create, and also having leaders within the team to sort of inspire and drive that direction. We've definitely brought more interaction between HR and IT. I think building the strategies together based on what are your technology needs and your architectural runway, as well as what is the talent, as Chris says. There is a war on talent. We're all fighting for the same types of resources. So I think it's definitely something where you really need to make sure that your operating model within, you're really clear on what your internal people, what your internal views are around ways of working. I think it's very easy to fall into sort of taking textbook processes and trying to apply sort of to your operating model, test and learn, looking for new ways of working. But you very quickly fall into, well, that was great. We created one squad and and we've got some really great agility out of it. But then you look, at the full environment that building societies work with, and you mentioned cloud. We are the fast followers. Trying to make sure that we're doing things in a thoughtful way, and we're making sure that we're very cost effective. So I think technology is definitely sort of driving how we need to work, but it's definitely, for me, the getting the blend of the methodologies that you're using within is really important. I think we've got ourselves at YBS sort of caught between I hate the term Wagile. You get lots of people who talk about waterfall and agile. We can't do either, so we'll just join them together, and it's a bit of an excuse because we've not defined sort of the end-to-end ways of working. And I think it gets quite tough. I think YBS is challenged around its ability to improve ways of working, the pandemic, the remote. But actually, we've still locked ourselves into really significant, organisational ambition. So there's not been a stop for us in that process. So your point about capacity, it really limits when you've got delivery plans. Everybody's challenged with a pandemic. How do you change your ways of working and adopt new processes, especially when you've got busy people who don't really understand the why bother, because I've done it like this for 10 years, so therefore why do I need to change? So I think just adding some sort of solutions and lessons to that. I think it really starts with understanding what you have today and planning for the now, near, and the future. We took a very bottom-up capacity and capability approach. Which allowed us really to now start to steer the organisation's investments with a view on what resource and capability we've actually got. So, of course, our product teams can be in a sweet shop when they're looking at what the fintechs are doing and what the startups are doing. But actually, you need to look at what capability and capacity you've got, because otherwise you shoot for the moon and don't deliver it, which obviously leaves a lot of people feeling like they didn't deliver, kind of what we need. So now we've found this balance of, the organisational strategies absolutely joined up with its HR plans, with its IT plans. And as we go into next year, I think this acceleration of trying to really see the positives in people. We've got a lovely mantra at YBS at the minute, which is technology alone doesn't power the world, people do. And I think just having to put that capacity for people to learn, again, cloud is great, and it's definitely, the way forward. But actually, what is your readiness as an organisation for cloud? What's your governance model? How do we make sure we're making the right choices with some of our satellite IT? So I think there's definitely something around learning. The organisation needs to have the capability in its people as well as its technology. So we're doing lots of things, incorporating development time into lots of sprint planning. So in the engineering, we've got COBOL developers learning Spring technologies, because that's what we have been saying for the last 10 years. And as Chris said, technology is faster. It's decommissioning faster. So no longer have you got a 10-year, kind of support model. It's a 3 years and done, and you've got to keep up. So I think not putting the time in to develop your people is an absolute, kind of, you run out of road. We've got test managers operating as multidisciplined servant leaders, Scrum type technology methodologies. I've just done a 3-year master's, so alongside my day job, I have the trump card for people who say I don't have time for learning. You make time, and I think you need leaders who can role model that importance of learning new technologies and methodologies, to get you to where you need to be. I hope that answers your question, because we were sort of coming from the pandemic back into the, what now is really the normal, and this acceleration towards, digital DevOps and agile ways of working.
Exactly. So when we move on, if you look at the benefits of some of these technologies, you know, whether that's DevOps or agile thinking, or you mentioned waterfall, etc. What are the benefits of these, or using these technologies, when you apply them to your sector, right? So the building societies. Maybe, Chris, is there anything that you want to position yourselves versus the other financial services firms or banks, as well, and highlighting these sort of technologies?
So for us, I think it's about experimenting with new technologies to understand what value we can get for our members. So I'll give an example. Blockchain is very interesting to lots of people. So we've just run a proof of concept where we've tried to create a distributed data vault where we can securely store data using blockchain. So that was a proof of concept. We've done that work. We found it isn't performant at all. It doesn't scale the way we've done it. So we'll move on to explore that, but we'll do a lot more experimentation before we put productionized services out there, because our number one aim really is to still be around in another 150 years. So we don't want to take any big risks on new technology. And when you look at cloud, I mean, there's two aspects to cloud. You've got the hardware. So cloud is other people's computers. That's all I call it. But there's also cloud technologies, and they're the more interesting piece, because when you look at all of the new ways that people have found of exploiting technology in the cloud, they're really interesting. And one of the things you don't really want to do is recreate your legacy applications in the cloud, although there might be some economic benefits to that if you're running your VMs in the cloud. But it's how do you exploit that new technology? And I'd like to follow up with a few comments about challenges, because it's not all really good. And one of the things I said we're seeing at the moment is we're getting much more collaboration, which is great, but we're seeing collaboration overload. So people's calendars are booked with collaboration meetings from 8 in the morning till 6 at night, and it's, well, when do you actually get the time to do that deep thinking work? So we are seeing collaboration overload, which can have a real impact on people's well-being. So we're addressing that, but also it's how can you be cleverer with your collaboration that you do, because more collaboration on its own isn't a good thing, because you can end up being paralyzed by you're just collaborating all the time and not doing anything. Then we've also got the whole DevOps piece and agility, which we've mentioned a few times. And one of the things about building societies is we've been around a long time. We've got a long history that we can call on. We know what our purpose is. So we're quite used to looking backward and learning lessons from the past, because the way the building societies sector has developed and matured over the years, it's generally we do something, then there's a failure somewhere, it might be a systemic one, a financial crisis, economic turbulence, and then we learn from that and we adapt. And that's the kind of way of working we want to move into everyday being. So we do something, we fail, we learn from it. We do something, we fail in some way, we learn from it. And learning from failure is so important. And that means people need to be more open about, what hasn't gone well and how can we learn from it. And then when I look at agility, I'm really pleased to hear the term agility rather than doing agile, because agile is an adjective, not a noun. There is no such thing as the Agile Manifesto. It didn't exist. There is a manifesto for agile software development, and that's really important. And we see that if you introduce things like agility without having that background and depth in understanding, you can do the wrong things and learn in the wrong way. So it's really important to take a step back and say, well, what is this really about? We're a building society. Maybe we'll take a week to actually look at this and understand it before we throw it out to everyone. So being a bit more retrospective is something we need to do, because introducing new ways of working is really disruptive. Because you'll have people who will say, this is fantastic, we need to apply it to everything. Then you'll get other people who say, I've always done it this way and it's always been fine, I don't want to change anything. And then you get the mass of people in the middle who say, well, if I see some value from it, I'm happy to try it, but I need a bit more evidence. And that's what I'm seeing every day in the organization. So many different things happening. And it's really exciting to see what people are doing independently. They're not waiting to be told what to do. They're coming up with their own experiments. They're trialing them. They're reporting back on them. They're discarding them when they don't work. But also, we're learning so much more than we did in the old ways of working. So, that's some of the downsides and challenges.
Wonderful, but you still sounded overall positive. And also, Becky, before when you talked about challenges, you also mentioned solutions. So in the interest of time, I won't ask you for more benefits, but I would challenge you a little bit more, frankly, and throw you the last curveball of the day, which is how do you scale these methodologies, right? Because that's the most difficult thing. You know, you can have a wonderful idea, wonderful methodology on paper, the software, all kinds of things. How do you scale it across the organization?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and I think I'd lead on from what Chris said. So, you know, don't confuse agile software and change methodologies with creating enterprise agility. They are different things and different levels. So, you know, your execs don't need to learn how to measure velocity or story points or understand automation pipelines and learn the language of a squad. From them, we need strategic planning, investments, and understanding how we want to enable fast flow with the autonomy in the teams, but they need clear priorities. So there's a big scale. When we say scale the methodologies, you know, it's two things. I'd say from scaling agile, more from a sort of solutions focused and really where we're at from a Yorkshire perspective, in the sense of software and change methodologies, not agility. I would say this is definitely dependent on each organisation and their runway for change. You know, when you're working on digital enhancements, cloud and innovation, you know, we should definitely be adopting agile DevOps automation, you know, bringing down those sort of monolithic releases that we've had in the past and creating a real fast flow of agile release pipeline, which allows you that continuous delivery because the technology allows you to do that. You know, we've now got weekly releases known as the fast lane at YBS, and typically, you know, we run major releases for complex transformations every 8 weeks, whereas, you know, we were grinding to a halt 3 or 4 years ago where we'd do 4 major releases a year, and if you missed the boat, you didn't get your change in. So it's about really, you know, kind of creating that ability to deliver fast. And then I think talking about sort of how organisations balance the methodologies, it's really good to appreciate your own environment and to not over-engineer, take all these methodologies and, you know, the next best thing and follow some of the large-scale organisations. I think just, you know, putting that into sort of relative to IBS, you know, some organisations have got thousands of squads operating in an agile methodology. You know, so for me, in a building society, I've got 14 engineering teams. Chris will have a lot more at Nationwide, but, you know, I've got 14 engineering teams that make up of around, you know, 10 people in each that cover skill sets from analysis, development and test. We're set up by domains, so we work in areas, so branch, telephony, payments. You know, 5 of them are referred to as squads because they're in the digital language. The rest of them are service teams. The service teams, you know, follow Kanban. The squads follow Scrum. The squads use Jira. The service teams use ServiceNow. It's about cohesion, not conforming to a methodology. So when we talk about scale, for me, it's about making sure that it's what that team needs to be able to deliver. And really, I think the other thing is making sure that you know what your success criteria is. You know, what is the measurement that you're trying to get out of scaling these methods within your organization? You know, is it time to deliver? Is it removing complexity and creating efficiencies? Or is it about talent and engagement? Or is it all of the above? So I think a lot of the time we scale the methodology based on the textbook, but actually, what is it you're trying to achieve? And I think if you're really clear on what that is, I think for building societies, you know, we're very thoughtful, we're very thrifty. You know, we should have the ability to move fast because we're not constrained by global issues and shareholders. And, you know, we've really got a clear purpose in that mutuality space. So I think sometimes it's our own, we get lost, our leaders get lost in feeling like they're being left behind because they're not keeping up with Google and Netflix and Spotify. And actually, it's quite overwhelming for building society leaders to feel like they've got to keep that pace. So yeah, just some insights from, you know, kind of not shooting for the moon.
Brilliant. Anything to add from your side, Chris, apart from I'm not sending any of my engineers to you, Becky, sorry.
No, but we can learn from each other. So, you know, the experiments we're doing, we publish them publicly, and other building societies can learn from those, and we can learn from them as well. In terms of scaling, you know, this is really important, how to do this, or how to approach it, because you've got to start with the why you're doing it. What are the outcomes you want to achieve? That will allow you to identify the measures that you can then track. But do go out there and learn from, you know, learn from the wider industry. So get scaled agile people in, understand what the scaled agile framework is. Look at Scrum of Scrums. Look at different people have frameworks now. All the consultancies have them in their bookshelves. They can come and sell or help you understand. Take all of that, learn as much as you can, even bring in experts from outside. But the actual adoption of scaling has got to be done internally, and it's got to be owned by our own people. So they need to work alongside the external experts and get the knowledge from them, because we need to do it to ourselves. Scaling can't be done to you. You need to scale yourself with the right support, with the right expertise. But it's got to be something you do yourself, and also it's got to go along with that cultural and mindset change. That's the thing that will allow it to happen. That's all I've got to add on that point.
Fantastic, well said. So thank you very much, Becky and Chris, and good luck to YBS and Nationwide.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's been a good session.